What's up, guys? Welcome to Whiskey. My name's Jeff. This is a channel where I offer my thoughts and opinions on a specific whiskey, and if you stick around to the end, I'll be giving it a score as well. If that sounds interesting, hit subscribe down below. And with that out of the way, let's jump into our review. Today we're looking at the Benriach Smoky 12. Stick around. So when I picked up this bottle, I didn't realize I had actually reviewed it before, but a really long time ago. The channel is now going on, or it's just over 2 years old, and I checked, this is actually like the 4th review I ever put out, so it's been a minute. Now this is one that I initially scored 86, but that was way back when in the early days of the channel, and I was a much more generous scorer back then. And that's not to say I'm not a very generous scorer now, I definitely am, but more so back then. Also, I've seen like changes in my preference and my palate over the last couple of years, so I'm actually not sure where I'm going to land on this one now. Honestly, it could go either way. Benriach, as many of you know, is one of Brown-Forman's flagship brands along with GlenDronach. Brown-Forman also owned Glenglassaugh, but they're kind of like the bastard stepchild. They're the weird one. Nobody really talks about them. And I'm not saying that because I think they're bad. I'm just saying nobody talks about them. Anyway, off topic. Benriach, the new line came out in 2020. They have these updated labels looking like this, and it doesn't seem to have gotten a lot of hype since then. I think the general consensus within the whiskey world is that they make good whiskey, they're decent, but they're just maybe not very exciting. Like, I don't see a lot of talk or online discussion about Benriach in the whiskey world. Maybe that's just me. And broadly speaking, I think they are pretty well reviewed and well liked. They're definitely not like poorly regarded, just maybe not very exciting. And that pretty much sums up how I feel about the brand myself. I do like them, and whenever someone brings up Benriach, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, nice. But I do miss those old days back when they had the Latin names and the super colorful bottles, and they were kind of experimenting with every kind of cask and every style of whiskey that they could. The whiskey at the time was very hit or miss, but it was very interesting. It was very Willy Wonka. Anyway, our Smoky 12 here is peated, obviously. Usually Benriach's peat levels is around 45 ppm. The bottle I've got here was bottled last year in July of 2022. We have 3 kinds of casks in the mix. We have bourbon, we have sherry, and we have Marsala. Marsala is an Italian fortified wine, or rather a Sicilian fortified wine, and it's not something you see too often in whiskey, but it is something that pops up here and there, and it can be good. Anyway, it's mid-January at the time of shooting this, so it's winter, it's cold, and usually at this time of year, I gravitate more towards like sherried whiskeys or peated whiskeys with a little bit more drama to them. So this one, as far as I'm concerned, is seasonally appropriate. Like I said, I did enjoy it last time, so I do like our chances today. Let's see where I land on this stuff. Let's jump into our review. And in the meantime, if you could kindly leave a like down below, that'd be greatly appreciated. So we do have some good specs on this one. It comes in at 46% ABV. It is non-chill filtered, and our color is natural. And of course, I'm always happy to see that. So I know not everyone's on board with this new look, but I actually don't mind the new look. I don't think it's exciting or anything, but I would say it's the brand's most professional look to date. We have very simple fonts, simple colors. It's not a thing of beauty, but I think it's fine. We'll give it 3 out of 5 for presentation. It does not say non-chill filter or natural color on the bottle. It might on the box, I'm not sure. I don't know where the box is. I must have lost it, but yeah, nothing on the bottle. What I do like about the bottle is that we have that little table on like the lower label there, and that'll always give you the cask types that were used, and it'll give you some tasting notes. So I do think that's some handy info, but of course the info is incomplete. The look is okay. On the nose, we get vanilla, baking spices, there's oak, and we have that earthy, almost mushroomy mainland style of peat. We also have oranges in here. It actually kind of reminds me of like a smoked cocktail. You know when they like smoke the glass when they're making those fancy cocktails? Kind of like that, but let's say they're doing that for an old fashioned, because we do have bourbony, vanilla notes in here. We have some oaky notes in here, and we have some orange citrus notes. So add on to that the smoked old fashioned. Why not? It's not too complex, it's not too simple. Some nice flavors here. On our palate and finish, we get loads of smoked vanilla. We have caramel, cola, cream soda, black pepper. There's blackberry jam, red fruits, orange hard candy. And on the finish, we get earth and pine forest, which, by the way, are 2 of my favorite snacks. Our finish is medium in length. All right, so this stuff is different from how I remember it being, but it is a nice whiskey, and I think it's an interesting alternative to your Islay/Island peated stuff. So if you're curious about that style of peat, like the mainland style of peat, I do feel like this one captures that essence nicely. This one's surprisingly not too sweet. In fact, it goes quite bitter in some places. The sweetness we do get comes in with the vanilla, and it is quite like a vanilla forward profile, but on the other side of things, we have this sort of bitter, peppery peatiness that kicks in, and I'm not convinced that I like that about it. I'm always cool with whiskeys that aren't too sweet, but I do feel like this one kind of goes too far in the other direction with that bitter peatiness. Also, I'll be the first to admit that I do like those coastal elements in my peated whiskey, and I often find myself missing them when I don't have them. So that tends to happen a lot when I'm drinking mainland style peated whiskeys, and that is the case here. But keep in mind, that's a very personal thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong or of lesser quality about mainland style peat. My preferences for those salty, coastal, maritime type notes are totally subjective, they're totally personal. And the thing is, if they're not there, they're not there. It's not like you're gonna recreate them. Then again, you can try, because I did find myself missing that oceany vibe with this whiskey. And the thing is, I don't live near an ocean, I live in the city, but an attempt was made. What I did, I added a bunch of table salt to the whiskey, and I went out to the back parking lot and sat next to a really big puddle. And let me tell you, it's not the same. Anyway, those are my only real two gripes with this whiskey. The fact that our peat goes a little bit bitter, and the fact that it's just not a coastal whiskey, and I find myself missing those coastal elements. And there's not much that can be done about the latter. It just is what it is. It's a matter of personal preference. Beyond that, I do think it's a good enough whiskey. It's solid at the very least. One thing I do like in here, though, is the pine notes that we get in the finish. It reminds me of a winter forest scene. Like, kind of takes me back to when I was younger and my dad and I would go out in mid-December into the forest to cut down the Christmas tree. You have the wood notes, you have the pine needles, you have the earth, it's all there. I realize I'm being like romantic and self-indulgent here, but it's my channel. Anyway, if you ask me to define this whiskey in 3 flavors, I'd say smoked vanilla, earthy flavors, and salted caramel. And if that sounds like it's going to be up your alley, then I do think it's worth a try. It is like a different take on Benriach. For me, ultimately, this is a decent whiskey, but it doesn't get me too excited. It doesn't really get anything wrong. It's not too complex, but obviously it's not too simple. I guess it's just not my style of peat at the end of the day, and I gotta be honest about that. So my score for this one is gonna be 83. Personally speaking, I do think Benriach are at their best when they're unpeated. That being said, respect where it's due, because they actually do give us both lines. They have a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old that are unpeated, and they have the 10 and 12-year-olds that are peated. So if you don't like this style, you can try this style over here. Very few brands give us that option, and I think that's super cool. And another thing I do respect is the fact that Benriach are among a handful of mainland style distilleries that are trying to champion mainland style peat. And I would imagine that's a pretty daunting task, because I think most customers out there are going to be like me. They're going to want those coastal, salty elements in their peated whiskey. So I think a lot of mainland distilleries are happy to leave it to Islay and island distilleries to give us the peated stuff. But I think it does take balls to try that. So A for effort. Now let's talk about value. I think our value is pretty good here. In my market, this is priced as an entry-level whiskey, which is precisely what it should be. It is going to be more expensive than the 10, and of course we would expect that, but it's still comfortably within the entry-level price range. And I think it's worth checking out for peat fans. It's age-stated, it's naturally presented, it's got a mainland style of peat, and I know that my review came off pretty harsh on this stuff and I didn't give it the highest score, but ultimately it's just because it's not my preferred style. I don't think it's lacking in quality, and I do think it's worth the money. Alright guys, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to help support the channel, I do have a Patreon. Otherwise, you can like, comment, and subscribe. That is always appreciated. And of course, I do want to hear from you. Have you tried our Smoky 12 here? How would you compare it to the Smoky 10 or the unpeated line? What were your thoughts on it? Finally, down below in the comments, you can let me know what you want to see me review next, and I'll keep it in mind for my upcoming videos. Bye guys.